Welcome, everyone. Thanks for turning your camera on, BJ. You look amazing.
Wow. The meeting's adjourned then. Nothing else needs to be said.
That's We'll just give people a little bit of time to trickle in. Apparently, if you don't work from home like me, there can be issues in the building, and it can sometimes be challenging to get on.
Just FYI, Benji, you might want to turn off your email and Teams while you're presenting. Or your notifications, at least.
This back window. Hold on.
I'm going to switch the screens that I'm using. Can you see my slide right now?
Yes.
Okay. Andy, how's the weather down in your part?
Crazy business. This is the most snow I've seen since I've lived here.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy. I have walls all around my house like taller than I can throw them, and we've already smashed them down 3 times to try and throw the snow higher. And we're running out of places to put it all over the valley. It's kind of interesting.
Well, it has been raining in Ogden for the last week, not snowing. So all the snow is now melted and gone.
It'd kind of be nice in a way. Your mountains have a lot, so that's what matters.
That's true. That's true. Is there anywhere to ski in Vernal?
No, our closest ski resort, if you go west, is Park City. If you go east, it is Grand Junction or Steamboat.
Oh. Those are not particularly close.
No, they are not. The closest actually is Park City, so about 2.5 hours. Our therapist actually has season passes to Park City. So he goes every weekend.
Well, I was expecting to see some more people on this call, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'm not going to make you that we're here on time wait anymore. So as far as just overall protocol, what we'll be doing is I've got a few slides. We're going to put you in some breakouts, although if this is currently what it is, then we probably will just stay in this room. Amanda, I don't think there's any point in putting people into a breakout. But if more people join, then we'll break you up into smaller groups. And then if you wouldn't mind keeping your camera on, that helps. That just helps me. I've got you over on a second screen here. Just like any type of teaching, when I see your faces, I can see either confused looks or can see that you're with me. So that does help. And then if you'll stay muted and use the icon to put your hand up if you have a question or there's something that you want to share, then I'll be able to call on you so that we can take you off mute. So that's what we'll do for protocol, and we'll get started. So we decided that we do a handful of webinars throughout the year. This is the first one that we'll do. So these will be in the middle of our YIC director meetings. And so this is the first one that we'll do. And I just wanted to do it on finances, where we are gearing up for our applications to start coming out. And so I just wanted to take some time to go over some things to keep in mind with that. And we'll have some discussion about it. So to start off with, I'd like to just start with some feedback with you. We are currently trying to finalize our MSP grant application by February 8th. So that's when we will have the grant writing workshop in Park City, or sorry, I'm saying Park City because you said Park City, Andy, and St. George. So we'll go down south. Hopefully it was a little warmer, and we'll do our grant writing workshop down there. And so as we are working on that, we're currently making some adjustments and tweaks. We'd love some feedback from you all on how that process is going, and if there's anything else that we should keep in mind. So I wanted to just start with a conversation and discussion with you about your experience with that. And looking on the call, you've all at least filled out an application once, some of you several times. So so as far as that process of filling out the grant, do you feel like there are any redundancies, things that you feel like you're filling out multiple times? Are there any aspects of it that we're asking you to do that are overly intensive, that just take you a lot of time and effort to try to get together? And then just ultimately, what do you think needs to be changed, or what should stay the same? So right now we're a small enough group, so we'll just stay right here. And you can just go ahead and unmute, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
The only thing that I would add, Benji, as you add forms, is if there is in the grant process, there's a 10% waiver. Anything that is an adjustment under 10%, there's no obligation for any kind of submission. But if you had a kind of like you do with a supplemental, if you had a 10% or more submission, if someone really wanted to keep track of it and submit that to you whenever that occurred, that would be ideal.
So just having a stock form for a 10% change.
Correct.
So it's not just a random email or.
Correct.
Okay.
Because then it just keeps you out of the conversation when you come asking. You're like, I already sent that to you. Like, for example, this wasn't 10%, but we ended up going to radios at the hospital, which JJYS has had radios forever. The hospital has not. They have on the adult forensic side, but they haven't ever had them on the pediatric side. But with the use of cell phones by staff being very kind of dangerous because they're not paying attention to youth, they decided to go to radios, and we had a share of that, and it was a chunk of change. It wasn't outrageous, but it was significant. I'd love to just throw that on a form and send it to you.
Okay, that's great. Who else?
Hey, I have Lindsay, our finance secretary and youth and custody secretary in with us, and as she's looking at the questions, she doesn't see any concerns or anything.
Okay. Well, then we'll keep the application pretty much the same. Like I said, there are a few tweaks that that we're looking at. Just to give you a quick example, we're putting part 1 and part 2 on the same paper with the idea that you won't need to get signatures more than once. So we'll just have one signature page. Because last year where we sent them out as 2 separate, it required 2 separate sets of signatures for those of you that had a part 1 and a part 2. So we're trying to be thoughtful on just reducing the amount of work that you have to do with this. So I mean, that's like a subtle change. And there'll be a few other things that I'll mention a little bit later, but if you guys are happy with it and there's nothing that you come across that makes you want to pull your hair out, then we'll keep it pretty much the same.
Are you not moving to Utah grants then this fiscal year?
Not this fiscal year, no.
What about next?
I mean, yeah, maybe.
So we don't, okay, so that's on pause. If you do end up not having to go into Utah grants, or you can kind of keep them at bay, a kind of digital signature option, if the board has one, would be great. DocuSign or Adobe signature or whatever's out there, just for that signature page would be another huge bonus.
Okay, that's a great thought. Because we've done that with the YIC signature page, right? That we could do it digitally. So yeah, so we could look at putting that then on just on the application directly. We can look and see what that would take. Okay. So I wanted to just take a second to go over what our process is with the MSP grant, just so that you have an idea of what it is that we do with them. So when they come in, the USBE YIC team, we look at, we've got 26 programs statewide, so we look through all 26. Not everyone has a part 1 and a part 2. Majority are in that space, but there's a handful of programs that only have a part 2. There's a handful of programs that only have a part 1. And so, so in the end, it's about, it's around 40 or so applications that we're looking through. We have a spreadsheet then that we just put all of that, we enter all of the expenses into it, and obviously compare that to our total allocation. As we look at your applications, we do always have that question in the back of our mind: is this the best use of taxpayer dollars? That is something that we get asked, that the legislature will ask us, and that we need to be conscious of. And of course, I would ask that you do the same as you're looking through your application and putting things down. We then do a cost comparison throughout the state. And so, and this is in particular on part 2. So part 1, where our statute has, our part 1 is where we primarily fund, and that's with students that are inside a state-owned facility that are not, school districts do not get a WPU for them. So like looking on the call, so like for BJ, so students that are in Farmington Bay, when they are there, Davis School District is not receiving a WPU. And that is why our line item primarily exists, is to ensure that educational services are still taking place inside a facility where a school district is not receiving funding for those students. Part 2 then is more of our school-based, where the school is receiving a WPU, but because of the unique needs and nature of our YIC students, we're still then allowed to use any leftover money to provide additional help and support for students in that situation. And so specifically there, that's where it gets a little more, it requires a little bit more processing on our end as far as whether or not it's the best use of funds. It's pretty varied throughout the state on how that's being used. And so we do look at that and then we present all of your plans then to a USBE financial committee. And that's probably the biggest question that they ask is when they say, well, why does it cost, $4,000 per student in this district and only cost $400 in this other district? That's probably one of the biggest areas of defense or justification that we need to provide. And so I'll just show you quickly just kind of what the spreadsheet is. So the way that we factor that and we figure it out is we look at your prior year's cum count as far as your YIC students in your district. We look at your residential bed count if you have that in your area. And then we create an adjusted count, which is a formula that's used between these two. And then we compare that to what your request is, to how much you ask for. And with that, then we come up with the cost per student. And so that's specifically then where it's varied and where the financial committee at USBE, they question that area. And then we'll, and in some cases it's very easily justifiable that it's just a small area and they happen to have educators that are at the tail end of their career, for example. So it just costs more. And in some places you're putting in a brand new computer lab. So supplies just happen to be high this year. And sometimes we come back and we don't really have a good justification. So we come back and we talk about how funds need to be reduced. So this is the spreadsheet that then we use to calculate that, and we look at that comparison, and we figure out our different allocations that we're going to send out. Any questions about that before I continue?
Benji, do you want to zoom into it a little bit so that they can see it a little bit more, especially in those areas you're talking about?
Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
And so with this, just something to keep in mind, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later. I'm going to have you guys discuss together. A big part of that then comes down to what is your YIC count in your district. And we, in talking to people, we know that sometimes those counts are not accurate, that they're not being recorded based on the true number that is there. But we can only go off of the reports that we have. And the reports that we use are, obviously UTREX, which is directly synced to your SIS system, which is just going to be based on, are you marking that students are YIC? Is that happening in your district? If it's not happening and we don't have record of it, then we have a hard time justifying funding. So we use that UTREX. We also work with DHHS on some of the counts that they have. And then we work with our data and statistics team to bring those reports together. We literally just met with them yesterday, and we're trying to figure out a way to have that be a little more automated, because right now we know that, depending on the size of your school district, you could have a school that has kids coming in and just manual error happens. Just a secretary or registrar or counselor just forgot to click that a student was YIC, and then that can impact your funding. So we are looking at if there is a way for DHHS's system to communicate with our USBE Utrecht system to try to automate that. We don't know if it can happen, if it's possible, but we are working with data teams to find the source of truth and be able to have true and accurate numbers as part of that. So, but until anything like that is actually able to be changed, it largely, I mean, that can impact greatly what your funding is on what, you know, what your YIC count shows in the Utrechts. So any other question about kind of how we figure this? That number as well, like when I talk about, we do a comparison, and a lot of that, like, it's not an exact science, right? Like, it's not a true simplified formula. Some of it depends on just what money is left over after part one. It's going to depend on what the legislature approves for us to have in our account, what your carryover amounts impact that. So there are a lot of different moving parts on it, but we do our best to try to make sense of it and to do what we feel we can justify and what is providing the appropriate services for the students in your area. So if there are no other questions, we'll come back. Okay, so I wanted to share with you some of the direction that we're trying to go, the future of this. So to start with, on February 8th in St. George, we're hoping that you are all there, that all of our YIC directors are there, so that we can do the MSP grant together. And there's two major purposes for that. One is so that we fill it out correctly. To be honest, there's 26 applications at 26 school districts, and I would say they're probably filled out 26 different ways. There's not a ton of consistency, and so that leaves us as a team oftentimes guessing on what it is that you're doing, and requires us to call you a lot of times or email you and try to figure out what's happening. So one of the things that we're trying to look for is that we'll do it together and be able to have a time to really walk you through it. I know personally when I took over for, let's see, was it Alejandro, Travis? Is that who I took over for? Yeah. I took over for Alejandro, 10 years ago at Mill Creek in Ogden. And when I took over, he just said, hey, here's the application, pretty much just copy and paste it. Everything's good. That was the amount of training that I received. There were a lot of phone calls that I made to Travis after that. I don't know if that's what it's been like for you all, but I would imagine that it's pretty similar, that you're just taking whatever the application was from the previous director and you're pretty much just rolling it over. So that's also left, I think, a lot of people kind of unaware of what they even could do or what they could ask for. And so that's the other major part of what we're trying to do is allow you all to be in the same room together so that you can collaborate together on what you do with your funds, how you spend them, the different ways in which you do that so that we can just bring more awareness. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, really hope that you are all planning on that you've got hotels set up if you're traveling, and that you're planning on being there. We're also currently, Julia and Dave are working diligently right now for us to utilize the service codes that DHHS uses to help inform the way in which we fund. So DCFS, for example, they have 7 different service codes that they use that all indicate the level of service and coordinating funding that needs to take place to serve a kid. As you know, not every student is created equal, right? We've got Travis that has students that are in the hospital that require a significant higher level of care than some of our DCFS students that are placed with a next of kin that we currently are providing a mentor for. And so there's just a wide range of the amount of service. So simply calling a student YIC and saying that the funding is going to be the same for each one, we know is really not the best way. And so Julia right now is working to look at the different service codes that exist for the students, and Dave, as well as working with JJYS and looking at kind of where our hot spots are as far as where our largest number of students are being placed when they are released. With that, then we're working on creating a multiplier. It doesn't look like Steve's on the call, but Steve, for example, in Iron County, has an excessively large amount of chrysalis homes that have students with very high levels of need. And so we're looking at then, and we can see that with the service codes, and we can plot it out on a map and see where we have the highest concentrations of students with these high levels of service codes. So when we see a large population like that, then we're looking at creating a multiplier, because we know that the number of staff and services that are going to be needed there, it's not going to be a one-to-one. And so we want to be able to then provide additional funding so that additional staff and resources can be provided in those areas. So along with that, then we get that randomly you may not have a large population, but you can get those individual students that come into your district that have significant needs. We had this exact thing happened last year in Cache. Cherie called us, and they had a student that just had a very, very high level of need, and they were unprepared, right? The student came, the school year was already going, they already had their staff, and now this individual student just required more support. And so with that, then modeling that off of what SPED does is we're creating a request for reimbursement form, so that if a student comes into your area and you have that student for a significant amount of time, to the point that you needed to hire additional staff or resources or services for them, at the end of the year, you can then submit a reimbursement showing that you had to do these additional, you had to purchase these additional things or have these additional expenses, and then we'll reimburse that to you at the end of the school year. The last thing that we're currently working on is increasing support to our day treatment centers. This is kind of a hot thing for our team right now. It's getting a lot of attention currently, where what's happening is a day treatment center will be in say Granite School District's boundaries, but the student's residency is in Salt Lake or Canyons or Jordan District. And so the students are coming and spending their entire day in the day treatment center. But then when they ask for educational services, it turns into this little caveat where it's like, well, they don't reside here, so we're not under any obligation to provide services because their residency is somewhere else. But as educators, we know that's an extremely challenging thing to have a kid be gone, not in your school, not in your area, and we're asking to provide educational services for a kid that you don't ever see. So currently we're working on being able to fund the day treatment centers to have educational staff on site so that they can provide the services to them. And so that's a direction that we're starting to go. I don't know exactly where we're going to go to that, but it's a place that we're going. In that process, we've been working with the Office of Licensing, and as part of that, pretty recently, we had a guardian ad litem contact our office and say, hey, I've got a student that's in DCFS custody. I placed them in this day treatment center, and they're receiving 0 educational services whatsoever, which was confusing to us because our understanding was that the Office of Licensing wouldn't allow a day treatment center to open unless there was an educational plan. And so when we talked to them, they said, yeah, there is the youth education coordinating form that someone signed off on. And so, we, as far as we know, they do have an education plan. But when we called them, they admitted that they really don't have anything in place. And so as we looked at that, the youth education coordinating form is something that is a form that is being distributed out and currently is being looked at and reviewed and signed on the local LEA level, that then is being given back to the treatment center and then sent into the Department of Licensing. So what I'd love right now is to have a little conversation and discussion about that. How many of you have gotten an education coordinating form, have signed one or been asked about one? And what is your understanding of your responsibility with that and how that even works? Chancey, go ahead and unmute.
So I wish I had learned this earlier on, but it depends, right? If they happen to have an agreement with the state where they're specifically providing care to our youth and care students, it's different. If it is like a private treatment center, you would really consider them like a private school, right? Like we don't just provide services to students in private school. There's a process for it. And so our mentor, Travis Cook, helped me to understand that we also don't have to accept the coordinating form. We can look at it, see if we're able to provide the services, and we don't have to just agree to do so, because there are 3 different responses that we can provide. So does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Who else has had experience with these? Travis, you have anything else that you want to give us input on?
Just the context is that when these entities come into any community, the first thing they have to do is they have to make sure that they are zoned appropriately to do the work that this is where those really fun meetings happen, right? Where communities bring out the pitchforks and say, how dare you in our community? After that, they get through that phase. In order to be licensed, they have to assert that they have an education component that will be reviewed for their license submission. The purpose of the coordinating form was always, as Chancey listed, to do one of 3 things. Say, yep, we're eligible for public education funds or youth and custody funds, or B, we're not eligible. Either way, the district knows that we reside in their backyard. The reason for that second component is for special education, proportionate share conversations, right? Just because an entity may not qualify for YIC, they may qualify as a private entity for proportionate share conversations within your LEA. And then the third one is basically where the 2 entities disagree on what they think is the most appropriate response to that form. And then there is a due process that can occur after that. But that's kind of the bottom line for why that exists. And, as Chancey's experienced, if someone's willing to provide service previous to Chancey's role there, and they didn't have to, right? But they did. That's something that can end as soon as someone realizes that they're not obligated to provide that service, and vice versa. If you find that someone's has always been eligible and hasn't received service, we're going to want to remedy that as well.
And the other thing I would recommend is verifying with the state, because the group that had they had told us that they did have youth and care students, and we did not ever confirm one. So.
And so those, and thank you, Chancey and Travis. And so those youth education coordinating forms. What I'm thinking that we'll do is that if you have any of those, we're going to ask you to submit those as part of along with your MSP grant, just so that we have the documentation that you've reviewed that you've either accepted or you're denying, or whatever it is, that we've got that on file so that we have more context when people call us. And then, like I said, on our end, we're wanting to fund, to use our funds to make sure that kids in these treatment facilities are getting support and they're getting education. I mean, they're there for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of different thinking behind setting them up and who they're supporting. But we're working with offensive licensing to make sure that we're providing adequate support. So that's kind of where we're going with that. Any other questions or thoughts about as far as like the service codes or hotspots or the request for reimbursement? Any questions or comments on that?
Benji, I'd like to just make an additional comment if you don't mind. On the day treatment centers, I just don't want any misconception that we're going to open that up to every residential treatment center that exists or any private run, thing. So we're not looking at opening doors for lots of opportunities for people to get public education. This is primarily those students that are receiving Medicaid services through their local health department or their local mental health authority, that are just not being captured anywhere else. So these are not private placed students in private facilities like Provo Canyons or what's another example? Anyway, they all exist, right? So just to be clear, and right now we only know of a few that might fall into this this category.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we got called about this time last year on a facility that when we investigated it, they were 100% of their students were from out of state, privately placed, and so that was one that was very easy for us to say, yeah, nope, like we're not supporting that. We're not, that's not what our line item is for. So yeah, so this isn't opening up to everything. So thanks, Julia, for that clarification. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So continuing on, something that we're looking at right now. So currently in the MSP application, we have 2 percentage categories. So we have the administrative cost, which is 18%, and then summer school, which is 17% of your total allocation. So we're working together as a team to look at adding those percentages in other areas as well. So under like supply and travel, professional learning, that those percentages will be there. Also, just to give a little bit of just kind of to give some guidance on the amount of money that should be spent in those areas, going back to that cost per student, and where it's a higher cost in some areas than other areas, giving you those percentages so that you have an idea. Now, those percentages, though, did not mean that you are going to be confined to that. If you, just like with our administrative cost, there's several of you that your administrative costs are above 18%. And so when that happens, there just has to be justification for it, as well as all the other categories. So, supply is 5% of your total allocation should be in supply. If you have a reason why that's going to be higher this year, you can still apply for more than that. You just have to explain why it's like what the reason is that it's going to be more. But our hope for that is that it gives a little bit more just kind of conceptual understanding of about where the funds should be at. Also looking at a little more structural guidelines, especially for our part 2. So part 1, the structural guidelines are pretty clear as far as we have very specific ratios of teacher to students in our secure care facilities and detention facilities and residential treatment centers. We don't have any of that in part 2 right now. And so we're wanting to move into that to be a little bit more, just more structurally set to say, okay, if you have a transition classroom with about 16 students, then that would qualify for a teacher and a para, and understanding that the cost of a teacher and a para is going to be different all the time, but just that structural component of saying this is how what we can justify paying for. Currently, right now, again, it's kind of different all over the place. In some applications, people request for us to pay a very small percentage of multiple counselors throughout the district that are interacting with YIC students. Some programs ask for us to pay for a percentage of your supervisor. And so it's just kind of spread out on what people ask for and what people don't. And so we're moving to try to just kind of tighten that up a little bit, so that it's just really clear what you can ask for and what you can't ask for. Along with that, in our board rule that was just approved, we had written in there, modeling off of SPED, the concept of indirect benefit. And so for SPED, they currently have that if you are, in order to fulfill the needs of a student's IEP for their specialized instruction, if you have one student that needs, let's say specialized reading instruction, that to provide those services for one student, often you could provide that for 2 or 3 or 4 additional students that don't have an IEP, but that their scores are showing that they need help in reading. And SPED will allow for that to happen as long as it's not detracting from the student's IEP. And in a lot of cases, like I use reading as an example because that's what they used in the SPED law conference that I recently attended. They showed, like, when it comes to reading, for example, often having a group of students enhances that student's ability. And so there is then what's called the indirect benefit of being able to provide specialized instruction to non-YIC students, but there are limits to that. Currently in Utah, that limit, I believe the specific number is 10, that that you can't have more than 10 students benefit from specialized instruction without it violating the indirect benefits concept. And so we wrote that in, that we would be able to, that's non-YIC students could benefit from YIC programs, but we do need to figure out what exactly that looks like. At what point is it excessive? So we will sometimes get requests to pay for a teacher in a transition classroom, and then when we ask how many YIC students in there, we'll get varied numbers. Sometimes say, well, 3 kids are in there. Okay, well, how many non-YIC students? 10 students are there. So because there are some YIC students, does that mean that YIC funds should pay 100% of that teacher? Should it be a portion of that? Is it that, well, YIC students will always take priority, and so if there happens to be open spots, we'll let other kids come in, but as soon as a YIC student comes in, the non-YIC students will be kicked out to provide that priority. Those are some of the conversations that we need to have to really kind of hone in what that indirect benefit means for us in YIC. So again, I want to just kind of open it up a little bit. I'd love to hear some of your initial thoughts on that, as well if you have any questions about the percentages or structural guidelines. So just want to open it up to you guys right now. You're a fun group, let me tell you.
So just for context, I'm trying to get Provo City School District, this should be done by the time we meet in February, but in order to meet this, right now, we don't use youth and custody dollars for any school-based placements outside of Check and Connect. However, there would be some value in having a braided relationship that exists throughout the Provo district alternative education continuum, which is a Bright Star elementary program for highly volatile, harm to self and others elementary youth, the Focus program, which is the middle school program, and then the alternative high school program, which is at Independence High School. What I'm pitching is that between youth in custody, special education, EARS funds or student at-risk funds, and traditional WPU, that each of those entities could have a 0.25% share in that continuum of classrooms from kindergarten through high school. And that would be the pitch that I'm going to make. And that would be what I would write into my grant in February. So it's a low cost response to a critical structure if and when a student is not able to return to a traditional classroom, right? But all the other parties are standing in the same space, supporting the same concept, right? So there's, to your point, indirect benefit could be argued in settings like that fairly easily.
Exactly. Thank you. And exactly what is that percentage though, right? So is it a quarter? Is it 30? Is it 50? Like right now, there's no definitive rule on that. That's where, and when I asked specifically, how did you come up with the, in special education, I said, well, how did you come up with the number 10? Like, where did that even come from? And the response was they had a committee of SPED directors throughout the state. They had a committee of 6 or 7 people, and that's what they came up together with. And so that's a similar, like, this is an agenda item that I'd like to have on our spring directors meeting on March 9th, for us to have that conversation to, to try to define a little bit more what exactly, at what point is it an appropriate indirect benefit, and what point is it violating that and becoming inappropriate. So right now we have the ability to figure that out, but that's not for me to figure out by myself or the USBE team. We need your insight and thoughts on that so that we can be able to justify to our auditors and to others that this wasn't a random idea that Benji had. This was statewide, what our YIC directors and team came up with. Okay, we'll move along. So this is an item that comes up periodically. So just wanted to make sure that it was clear for everybody. Sometimes we'll get questions when it comes to spending funds on, do we allow this? Is it okay for us to, will we approve it? And so there is just a line that want to make sure that it's very clear. We provide funding for your programs, but as far as a lot of the guidelines on if it's appropriate or not is going to come from your own LEA. So travel, for example, we've been asked, like, will we approve out-of-state travel in the MSP grant? And the answer is, that's up to your district. We will fund what your district will allow. So if your district allows out-of-state travel, then yeah, write it into your grant. If they allow one out-of-state travel, and you want to do that, or you can only take 5 staff to an out-of-state, or whatever your LEA has, we support whatever that is. Now, this last year, we did deny out-of-state travel in the MSP because we have about $30 million to distribute, and we had $31 million in requests. And so we couldn't satisfy everybody's request. And so that was an easy area for us to just statewide say, we're not approving out-of-state travel because it is a high cost to do that. And and that was getting us down into the, getting us down back into the 30 million by denying those. And so with the idea that if then in the supplemental, if there's carryover funds that you have, then we'd be happy to approve out-of-state travel with supplemental. Something to consider with that, though, is the timing of it. And this happened to Ed specifically in Ogden. So he had written into his MSP to take his staff to the National Alternative Ed Association conference, which I denied, but then told him, but if there's money in supplemental, you can use that. Well, the conference was held in October. So by the time the supplemental came out, it was too late for him to process the travel and everything through his district, and get the supplemental funds from us. And so just something to keep in mind as far as like the timing of things. If there is an out-of-state travel that you request and we come back and say there's not enough funds statewide, so we're going to say no. But if this is like a really critical thing that a training or conference that you really feel like is going to be instrumental in improving your program, then it's something to talk to us about. And potentially then that means that you would reduce something else, like some supply or some local travel or local conferences, knowing that then when the supplemental comes through, you could, as long as there's funds in there, you could ask for that again and we could distribute it. So far, and Travis, you're welcome to jump in. I don't imagine there's ever been a year where there hasn't been some supplemental funds. I think it's pretty safe to assume that there always are some. Obviously, the exact amount is going to vary year to year, but Travis, did you ever have a year where there was zero money in supplemental?
08 and 09. No, I know 09, 10. So no, that's a joke. That's when we got cut $2 million overnight and we had no money. But since then, things are good. So, but I think the other thing that's really important to understand as a group is that because of these other mechanisms in place, the maximum carryover, the summer school flexibility, if and when push came to shove and an individual LEA was having a hard time meeting their FAPE obligation or their compulsory obligation, USBE has some other tricks in its bag to make sure that we don't have to go to the board or to the legislature to ask for more funds in a given year. So no, supplemental is a consistent element of that as well.
Yeah. And so then as far as just your purchasing guidelines, so this specifically came up for those of you that have a detention or secure care facility. We had some funding that we wanted to put out to make sure that basketball standards are the ones that were tracked up into the ceiling. Unfortunately, we had a student that was able to scale his way up on a basketball standard that was attached to the wall, and tried to commit suicide that way. And so luckily that didn't happen. Everyone was okay. But we certainly don't want to, we want to learn from that and not put ourselves in that situation again. So we had some extra funds, wanted to make sure that the basketball standards then are ones that we could still have PE opportunities and recreation opportunities, but do so in a safer way. So we told everyone, hey, submit, we want to get these for you. And so the cost of these was around $20,000 typically to put it in, and it depended on the size of your gym and how many. And so as far as your purchasing guidelines, those again are your LEAs. Some LEAs are going to require that if anything is over $5,000, you have to get multiple bids. If it's above $30,000, you've got to get board approval. I mean, your LEA has those purchasing guidelines, and you need to follow those. That's not us. We don't decide that. We're not going to ask you for 2 quotes. We had some YC directors called and were like, all right, so do we just email you the quote? You don't email us the quote. We don't take that. We don't do anything at all with those. You just send us the amount of money that you need. We'll send it to you, and then you've got to work through your own district as far as how all of that happens. So same with your tech renewal, you follow whatever policy your district has. When it comes to like faculty meals, swag, student incentives, again, we'll get asked that specifically, like, oh, can I buy shirts for my staff? If your district allows that. I mean, I know in Ogden district, we would have an opening session to kick off the year. And I remember my first year as YIC director, I show up with my staff and I see all the other schools have like matching polo shirts with their school emblem and everything on it. And all of my staff are in, Van Halen t-shirts or whatever cool shirt they had, which I do think we were cooler than them, but there's like, that was something that's allowed in our district. And so then I applied to get funding so that we could, because our YIC teachers should absolutely be treated and cared for just the same as any other teacher in our school district. Of course, it can't go the other way though. It can't go into an incentive, right? Like you can't be above and beyond what other people do. Like that's, that looks bad on us at that point. But as far as all of that works, can you buy for Teacher Appreciation Week? Can you buy lunch for your teachers? If your business department lets you, then go for it, do it. So as long as you're following your LEA guidelines, the funding that we send you is going to be approved for those types of things. Any questions about any of that? And I'm a large, by the way. So when I come to your school, just when you're purchasing those things, just keep that in mind. So, sometimes a medium, but usually a large. People prefer it when I wear a large. All right. So then when it comes to coding, so again, I brought up with you before, ensuring that students are coded in your SIS system as YIC. That greatly impacts not only your individual schools funding, but it will impact the funding throughout the state, right? Because if those are the things that the legislature is going to look at when they determine what our funding is. If they see a dramatic decline in the amount of YIC students in the state of Utah, then obviously they're going to adjust the funding accordingly. And so something that I want to open up for conversation is, as the YIC director in your respective districts, how are you ensuring that schools in your entire district, so not just the school that you are principal of, but throughout the district, how are you ensuring that they are coding students as YIC?
So I'm in the process right now. I'm one of those districts that don't code the kids right. And so in our system that we use at Davis County, I'm going to have like a button that you have, for instance, like a IEP kid or something. I'm going to have a YIC button tied to that, so it'll automatically go into Utrex, and so we can get these kids coded the right way. It's not there yet, but I'm working on that.
Thanks, BJ.
And Benji, in Tooele, we switched from Aspire to Skyward this year, and that's we had a classification in Aspire that we could when the kids came in, we could code them as a YIC or a DCFS kid, and it's been a challenge to get that done in Skyward, but we're working on that.
So are you doing like admin trainings or counselor trainings, secretary trainings? I mean, how are people in your district, how do they know the importance and how to check that? I mean, checking a button, right? But that button accounts for sometimes millions of dollars. So how are people doing that?
We do counselor training and also through registrar training, as well as promoted our leadership meetings with all district leadership.
Thanks, Brian. BJ?
At the beginning of the year, we meet with all the head secretaries with all levels, elementary, junior high, high school, and registrars. So we hope the more we talk about it, the more people will remember and do it.
So you're asking to be on the agenda with YIC to make sure that that's getting to them?
Yes.
And I think that's a great thing. I mean, I would imagine there are going to be times where people just aren't thinking about it, right? There's all kinds of things that need to be trained on. You got to be trained on McKinney-Vento. You've got to be trained on free and reduced lunch and all those different things. So I think being proactive as the YIC director in your area and making sure that your content is being covered as well is pretty critical.
Benji, I think Chancey has her hand up.
Go ahead, Chancey. Oh, like blended into the picture frame behind your I didn't even see that.
So all of them come through our office. The youth and care coordinating forms come right to my admin assistant. And so she codes everything. Every now and then we'll have a rogue caseworker or foster family who will just enroll directly at the school. But then the schools, they typically reach out because they want to know what supports are available. So then we just get it coded right away, and make sure that we have our mentors aligned to those students as well. So that's our process.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, and so then as well, as far as just like actual coding of expenses and charges, so 5340 is a program code for YIC, and so that's something that we do see sometimes. So we do monitoring visits throughout the year, and part of that monitoring is we do ask to see your fiscal ledgers. We look at that. Every once in a while we will see that. We'll say, tell us about this expense, like that looks odd to us. And there are times that a director sees that and goes, oh yeah, that shouldn't have been charged to YIC, that should have been charged somewhere else. And so making sure that things are coded properly as well. Even on the other end, I'm currently working with a district where their carryover amount is so high that I can't see how they paid their staff through YIC. Like the amount of money that they requested just to pay salaries far exceeds what the carryover amount is that they have. And so it appears, I'm working with their BA right now, but I am under the assumption based on that, that there are teachers that are YIC that should be paid YIC that looks like they're being paid through a different source. And so, so with that, like how often do you all like check in with your BA or an accountant or financial secretary in monitoring and checking how your finances are being charged so that you'd be able to catch things like that throughout the year? How do you guys operate and do that in your respective places? Jerry turned on his computer, so apparently he wants to say something.
Yeah, I was just saying, most of us don't want to talk to our BA that often because then he might cut our funds. But we do meet with him. We meet with him twice a year.
So 2 times a year, you sit down and look over to make sure that things are being coded the right way.
Well, and hopefully they're not cutting your YIC funds. We're not getting any money back.
We just don't want him to know what we're doing that much. Then he looks too close.
I'm curious to know, so I get an automated report of purchase orders, personnel, and any outstanding costs and revenue streams. Does anybody else get that just naturally as part of your district system?
Dan's giving a very affirming head shake, so.
That is correct, every month.
Well, if you're not, something that maybe a practice that you start doing, right? To just kind of see where things are and be able to correct items before it gets, before it gets too late.
And if I could say something too, kind of what Gerald was going off of, which it's interesting in Alpine District how there really isn't anybody in our business services department that fully or truly, whether it wants to or does, really understand our funding. They know we get money and they know we have a 5340 and we, but it's interesting that myself and our Summit's finance secretary, we go through our line items every single month, receipts, we do it pretty thoroughly on our level. And then we check the districts, cross references from what our Alpine district has for us and is taking out of our accounts. But when I ask questions over at the district level, I think it may be because our little account on the global scale of Alpine's $1 billion budget is pretty small pickings, but it sometimes makes me curious how nobody really understands, or they don't care to understand, or it just kind of happens. So I don't know if that's a unique to Alpine thing, but again, I don't ever complain about it because, it's like, I don't actually want them to know what we're doing, but I do. It's like you want them to know when they're helping you, but not if they're going to be scrutinized. But it is an interesting phenomenon that actually I was talking with our former director just last week, who had been around, for years before. And in Alpine, he said the same thing. He said there was nobody back in the 90s and early 2000s that really truly understood their funding, Summit's funding. So it's not necessarily a new thing.
You hit it on the nail, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when 9 of the 26 YC directors get on the call, that limits greatly the amount of discussion. So we're going to be done early, which I'm sure is a huge disappointment to everyone. But any final questions or thoughts or concerns about the way in which finances work within the YIC world? Okay, who's going to be in St. George on February 8th? Good. Look forward to seeing you all there. We'll fill these out together and knock it out. And BJ is buying golf for everybody. So, we're grateful for him for donating that. That's really nice. And I guess this is being recorded, so no, not really. That was a joke. That was not real. So, yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for all that you do. And always feel free to reach out if you ever have a question about things. Otherwise, we'll see you on the 8th. Take care, everyone.
Hey, USBE staff,